Have you ever wondered what happens to a state when it runs out of money, but people still live there? The streets crumble, the hospitals close, the schools vanish, and crime moves in like it just signed a long-term lease. Sounds like a plot to some depressing movie, right? Well, it's not. It's already happening in parts of America because of this trade war. Today we're looking at 10 U.S. states that are walking a financial tightrope over a canyon with no safety net. These are places where one bad recession, one big industry collapse, or even one really nasty hurricane could turn things from bad to pack up the truck, Martha, we're out of here. We're talking about states drowning in debt, bleeding residents, and running on systems so fragile that if Washington sneezes, they catch pneumonia. Some of these states you'd expect to see on a list like this, others will surprise you. But all of them have one thing in common. If the U.S. economy goes south, they're first in line to take a big hit. Is your state on this list? Stick around and find out. Got it? Get it? Good. Let's take a look. Number 10, Mississippi. The only real surprise here is that they're not number 1. When you think of Mississippi, you might picture endless cotton fields, catfish farms, and sleepy little towns where the biggest event is the local football team winning a game or the mayor catching his 4th drunk driving infraction. But beneath that slow southern charm is an economy so fragile it could get knocked over with a fart. Yes, it's my granddaughter's joke. She told me to put it in there. Mississippi is one of the poorest states in the U.S. The median household income here is about $62,000. That's for a couple. $62,000. That's what they're making. That's a solid 25% below the national average. Nearly 1 in 4 residents live below the poverty line in Mississippi, and only about 53.8% of working age adults are actually in the workforce. Now, that's just not a whole bunch of people in their 20s sitting around. That's, retirees and stuff like that. It's just a big number, 53.8%. It's the second lowest rate in the entire country. Mississippi's economy historically has leaned heavily on agriculture and manufacturing. But to be honest, both have been limping along for decades in this state. In the 20th century, the Magnolia State failed to industrialize at the same pace as other states, relying instead on low-wage labor and outdated infrastructure. When NAFTA hit in the 1990s, textile jobs that were big in Mississippi evaporated. And when the Great Recession came about in 2008, the recovery here was so slow, it could have been filmed in slow motion. Even today, Mississippi's GDP growth is usually in the bottom 5 nationally. Then there's the education system. Mississippi has consistently ranked dead last in the K-12 education outcomes for years. Only about 22% of adults in Mississippi have 4-year degrees, which makes attracting high-paying industries almost impossible. You can't build a tech hub on cheap land if they don't have enough engineers or people who can count to 20 to fill jobs. And while other states lure foreign investment, Mississippi gets almost none. Foreign-owned companies in Mississippi account for about 0.003% of the state's GDP. The infrastructure here blows. Rural hospitals have been shutting down for over a decade at a pretty good pace, leaving entire counties without emergency medical care. Like, no emergency room. You got to go to the next county over. The latest developments with cuts in Medicaid will hit Mississippi hard, and they're kind of entering the catastrophe zone already. Roads and bridges are in such bad shape that the American Society of Civil Engineers have rated the state D. Yeah. There's only one worse. It's called an F, and they're almost there. If a national crash hits, Mississippi's already struggling system could go dark in weeks, not months, not years, in weeks. The scary part, for much of America, Mississippi's decline is invisible. It's not a media hotspot, it's not a political battleground, and it's not a tourism darling. But it's quietly sinking, and if the U.S. economy takes another major hit, entire Mississippi counties could turn into ghost towns, and barely anyone outside the state would notice. Number 9, Louisiana. Louisiana is one of those states that looks amazing on a travel brochure. New Orleans is bursting with jazz, gumbo, and street performers. The bayous are full of wildlife with a suspicious number of things that could eat you. Mardi Gras alone brings in 1 million visitors a year. But here's the thing, behind the beads and the brass bands, Louisiana is one of the most financially fragile states in America. You got to start with the poverty. 18.6% of the residents live below the poverty line, making it one of the highest rates in the country. The median household income here is about $69,000. Just to give you an idea of how far away that is from the top, the highest is Massachusetts, and they're about $108,000 for a couple a year. That's the average for the state. Louisiana, $69,000. And while the state's unemployment rate sometimes looks average on paper, that's only because so many people here have already dropped out of the workforce entirely. Historically, Louisiana has lived and died by the oil and gas industry. In the 1970s and early 80s, the state was flush with petroleum money. Then came the oil bust of 1986, which gutted jobs, slashed tax revenue, and sent thousands packing. Fast forward to today, and oil still makes a massive share of Louisiana's GDP, around 10% directly, and much more indirectly through related industries, people supporting the oil industry. That's a problem because global oil prices are about as predictable as an alligator in mating season. One sharp drop in demand, like we saw in 2020 during the pandemic, and Louisiana's economy gets knocked out flat. And if oil doesn't get you, the weather might. Louisiana is one of the most disaster-prone states in the country. Hurricane Katrina in 2005 cost $125 billion in damage, permanently altering the city of New Orleans, and accelerated the state's population decline. A lot of them moved to Houston. More recently, Hurricane Laura, Ida, and Zeta all hit within a few years of each other, costing billions more. Disaster recovery is expensive, and Louisiana's rainy day fund isn't exactly overflowing. In 2023, the state had $904 million in reserves, less than 2% of its annual budget. Education and infrastructure are also near the bottom of the barrel. The state ranks 48th in education quality, according to U.S. News, and much of its infrastructure is literally sinking. The Louisiana Department of Transportation has said it needs about $14 billion to fix and maintain its roads and bridges. Meanwhile, nearly 40% of the rural hospitals are at risk of closing due to financial distress. And again, cuts to Medicaid will be the last nail in the coffin for a lot of them. The scary part, a lot of Louisiana's problems are interconnected. A hurricane knocks out oil refineries, the economy tanks, tax revenue dries up, and suddenly the state can't fund schools, repair roads, and keep hospitals open. People leave, the tax base shrinks, and the cycle gets worse. It's not a hypothetical. It's the exact loop Louisiana has been stuck in for decades. On the surface, Louisiana feels alive, music in the streets, parades, festivals, but look closer and you'll see that it's been running on fumes. It could hit a downward spiral so steep that Mardi Gras floats might be the only thing still rolling through town. Number 8, Michigan. Michigan loves a good redemption arc. After all, it's the birthplace of the American auto industry, Ford, GM, Chrysler, companies that once defined middle-class prosperity. And if you just skim headlines, you might think Michigan's back in business. Downtown Detroit has some shiny new developments, auto sales have rebounded since the Great Recession, and unemployment isn't the worst in the nation anymore. But spend more time there than a weekend, and you'll see the deeper reality. Michigan is still on financial life support. Here's the numbers that should scare you. 38% of Michigan's residents were classified as in financial distress in 2024. That means overdue bills, maxed out credit cards, bankruptcies, the works. It's the highest rate in the entire country. And no, that's not just Detroit. It's Flint, Saginaw, Muskegon. The dependence on the auto industry is still a huge problem. Manufacturing accounts for about 19% of Michigan's GDP, more than double the national average. That's great when cars are selling and supply chains are humming. But remember 2008 and 2009, GM and Chrysler went bankrupt. 400,000 Michigan jobs evaporated and the housing prices cratered. It took nearly a decade to climb back, and the climb isn't over. Even in good years, plant closures are common. But then there's the infrastructure problem. Michigan's roads are so famously bad that "fix the damn roads" became an actual campaign slogan for the governor. The American Society of Civil Engineers gives Michigan a D plus for infrastructure, and that's before you get into the water crisis of Flint, a saga of lead contamination that began in 2014 and still isn't fully resolved. It's much, much better. It's not 100% yet. In rural areas, residents are still on boil water advisories, some for years at a time. And let's talk about the population trends. Michigan has lost nearly 600,000 residents since its 1970s peak. It's not just fewer people to fill jobs, it's a shrinking tax base, fewer kids in schools, and more abandoned properties. Detroit alone has more than 20 square miles of vacant land, an area larger than Manhattan in New York. While some neighborhoods have rebounded, others look like they've been frozen since 1980 with collapsing houses and overgrown lots. The truth is, Michigan is exhausted. The boom and bust cycles have drained the optimism out of entire communities. Grandparents remember good union jobs with pensions and benefits. Their grandkids are working gig economy shifts just to keep the lights on. When the next national downturn hits, Michigan won't have a reserve, financially or emotionally, to weather a long winter. And here's the kicker. By the time outsiders realize Michigan's in trouble, it might already be too late. Number 7, Texas. I know a lot of you aren't going to agree with this because Texas got a lot of things going for it, sort of. Texas is like that guy at a bar who buys everyone drinks, brags about his investments, and swears that he's doing great. But his credit cards are maxed out and his truck is 2 payments behind. On paper, Texas is an economic powerhouse. It's the 9th largest economy in the world if it was its own country, pumping out over $2.6 trillion in GDP in 2023 alone. Job growth has been off the charts and people are moving here in droves. But scratch the surface and you find some unsettling truths. For starters, 35.9% of Texans were in financial distress in 2024, the second highest rate in the nation. That means more than a third of the state is behind on bills, dealing with bankruptcies, or juggling high interest debt just to get by. And while cities like Austin, Dallas, and Houston are booming, rural Texas is quietly hollowing out. Drive west of San Antonio and you'll hit counties where the population has been shrinking for decades. Schools are closing and hospitals are disappearing. Then there's the housing situation. Texas was long known for affordable homes, but the pandemic real estate boom flipped the script. In Austin, the median home price jumped from about $335,000 in 2019 to about $540,000 in 2022. It's insane. Before cooling slightly, but it's still far above what many locals can afford. Even in smaller cities, rent hikes have outpaced wage growth, and it's not uncommon to meet Texans working 2 jobs and still can't afford health insurance or a down payment for a house. Energy is both Texas' biggest strength and its biggest risk. The state produces 43% of America's oil and 26% of its natural gas, which is solid numbers. But as the world shifts towards renewable energy, that dependency could become a liability. Oil markets crash like the 2014 collapse or the 2020 pandemic drop. And this has led to massive layoffs. And let's not forget the Texas freeze of 2021 when the power grid failed, leaving millions without electricity or heat for days, causing at least 246 deaths. The disaster exposed just how fragile Texas infrastructure is. Healthcare is another soft spot. Texas has the highest uninsured rate in the country at 16.6%, meaning millions of Americans have no safety net if they get sick or lose jobs. Public health funding is low and rural hospitals have been closing at an alarming rate. 26 closures since 2010, many in areas with no alternative facilities nearby. Brutal. The image of Texas as unstoppable is compelling, but it masks the deep divides between booming metro areas and struggling rural towns, between wealthy newcomers and working class families barely holding on. When the national economy dips, Texas won't collapse overnight. That Lone Star resilience might not be enough to hold the pieces together. Number 6, Illinois. Illinois is one of those states that still has a certain prestige. Chicago's skyline is world-class, the state's universities are top tier, and it's home to some of the most important transportation hubs in the country. But peel back that glossy image, and you'll find one of the most financially unstable states in America. Places where decades of political mismanagement have left a budget so stretched it's practically see through. Let's start with a big one: pensions. Illinois has the worst funded pension system in the United States. Depending on who you ask, the unfunded liabilities sit somewhere between $140 and $150 billion. And no, that's not a typo. This is the financial equivalent of owning a mortgage on a house that's already burned to the ground. The state's pension funding ratio hovers around 44%, meaning that for every dollar it owes to retirees, it has less than 50 cents saved. That's just one piece of the mess. Illinois' rainy day fund, basically the state's emergency savings account, is one of the smallest in the country. In 2022, the state only had enough reserve to run operations for about 15 days without renewed revenue, meaning if nobody was paying taxes or anything like that, they could survive for 15 days. That's it. Texas and California could operate for months. If a recession hits, Illinois will have no cushion. The immediate result: service cuts, layoffs, and tax hikes, which Illinois residents already know far too well. Property taxes here are among the highest in the nation, averaging about 2.1% of a home's value annually. And people are voting with their feet. Illinois has lost population for 10 straight years, bleeding out middle-class families to states like Florida, Texas, and Tennessee. In 2023 alone, the state's population dropped around 100,000 residents. Every person who leaves takes their tax contributions with them, which makes it even harder for Illinois to meet its obligations. Infrastructure isn't in great shape either. While Chicago's downtown is impressive, drive a few miles outside and you'll find roads and bridges that desperately need repair. That's all over the country, but they have an unusual amount. 21% of Illinois' roads are in poor condition, and more than 2,300 bridges are structurally deficient. And speaking of Chicago, the city itself is drowning in debt. Chicago public schools and the city's police and fire pension funds are massively underfunded. Violent crime has been a persistent challenge, scaring away both residents and businesses. Companies like Caterpillar and Boeing have moved their headquarters out of Illinois entirely, citing costs and business climate. Number 5, Hawaii. Hawaii is one of those places that doesn't need an Instagram filter. Turquoise waters, volcanic mountains, palm trees sway in the trade winds. It's the dream. But for those people who actually live there, that dream has been getting harder to afford every single year. Beneath the sunshine is one of the most fragile state economies in America, and it's got very little margin for error. The cost of living here is not just high, it's astronomical. Hawaii constantly ranks number 1 in the US for cost of living, with prices about 88% higher than the national average. The median home price in 2024 here was around $835,000, and rent for a modest one-bedroom apartment can easily exceed $2,000. But speaking of vulnerability, tourism accounts for about 21% of Hawaii's GDP and employs nearly 1 in 5 workers. That's great when planes are full and cruise ships are docking daily, but when global travel stops, Hawaii's economy craters almost instantly, and the pandemic proved that. In April of 2020, Hawaii's unemployment rate spiked up to 21.9%, the highest in the nation, as tourism dried up overnight. Recovery has been slow and uneven, with visitor numbers still fluctuating based on airline costs, natural disasters, and even events halfway across the world. Now, we just did a video recently about how the tariffs and different events in our economy have killed tourism in a lot of states. Hawaii is one of the ones that has been hit the hardest. But Hawaii's isolation also means disasters hit harder. In 2023, Maui wildfires killed 101 people, destroying more than 2,200 structures and caused $5.5 billion in damages. The economic impact went far beyond Maui. Tourism dropped statewide, especially among visitors who canceled trips entirely after seeing the images of the devastation. That dip in visitors' spending rippled through restaurants, hotels, and small businesses that were already on edge. There's also the exodus problem. More native Hawaiians are leaving the island than at any other point in its history, heading to the mainland for affordable housing and better job opportunities. Between 2015 and 2022, Hawaii lost more than 27,000 residents. That was their net migrations. Sure, they still had more people coming in, a lot more people left, to the tune of 27,000. Hawaii might look like a paradise from a distance, but up close, it's a fragile ecosystem, both environmentally and economically. One major hit to tourism, prolonged shipping disruption, or another large-scale disaster could send the state into a financial spiral that will take decades to recover from. Number 4, Kentucky. Kentucky has a reputation for bourbon, horse racing, and picturesque countrysides. But underneath the postcard charm is one of the most economically distressed states in the country. Nearly 20% of its residents live below the poverty line, and in some rural counties, that figure climbs to over 30%. The median household income here is about $58,000, well below the national average. Kentucky's problem isn't just low income, it's the steady disappearance of opportunity. Historically, Kentucky's economy was built on coal mining, manufacturing, and agriculture. Coal, in particular, defined the entire region of East Kentucky for more than a century. But between 2008 and 2023, Kentucky lost more than 70% of its coal mining jobs, thanks to automation, cheaper natural gas, and a global shift towards renewable energies. Towns like Harlan and Pikeville, once bustling with miners and their families, now struggle with boarded up storefronts and shrinking populations. The jobs that replace the coal, many are low-wage positions in retail or service industries with few benefits and very little job security. The manufacturing sector, while still present, hasn't been immune from decline either. Kentucky produces more than 1 million vehicles a year thanks to major plants from Toyota, Ford, and GM. But the global supply chain disruption, like those during the pandemic, have led to temporary shutdowns and layoffs. When these plants pause production, entire local economies feel the shock. Healthcare access is another major crisis point. Over 40% of rural hospitals in Kentucky are at risk of closure due to financial strain. Many countries already lack basic emergency services, are forcing residents to drive hours for care. The opioid epidemic has compounded the problem here, hitting Kentucky harder than almost any other state. In 2022, Kentucky had the third highest drug overdose death rate in the country, with over 2,100 fatalities. Many of those were in economically depressed rural communities where addiction and unemployment feed into each other in a devastating cycle, really. Kentucky is also one of the most federally dependent states in America. Around 40% of the state's budget comes from federal aid, whether it's Medicaid, food assistance, or infrastructure. That means any significant federal budget cuts, like we're in the middle of right now, could have immediate and severe consequences. It's a fragile system where a single disruption at the national level can pull the rug right out from under millions of residents in Kentucky. And then there's the education gap. Kentucky ranks in the bottom third of U.S. states for educational attainment, with only 27% of adults holding bachelor degrees or higher. That makes it harder to attract high-paying industries like tech or biotech. Without new industries, the state stays locked in a cycle of low-wage work, high poverty, and limited upward mobility. Kentucky's decline isn't always obvious to outsiders. You won't see mass protests or abandoned skyscrapers, but in the hollers, small towns, and even parts of its cities, the erosion is constant. If the national economy hits a recession, Kentucky doesn't have a cushion at all. It has a thin thread holding it together, and threads can snap without much warning. Number 3, Nevada. Nevada has built its entire modern identity on one thing: entertainment. They do a really good job. Las Vegas and Reno are the lifebloods of the state's economy, with tourism and hospitality making up over 25% of all jobs. In good times, that's great. People fly in, drop billions at casinos, hotels, shows, and restaurants, and the state rakes in tax revenue without charging a single dime of state income tax. But here's the catch. When people stop spending, Nevada's economy doesn't slow down. It falls off a cliff. We've seen this before. During the Great Recession in 2008, Nevada had the highest foreclosure rate in the country for years. At one point, 1 in every 9 homes was in foreclosure in Nevada. Entire subdivisions sat empty, weeds growing taller than the for sale signs. Unemployment hit 13.7% in 2010, and Las Vegas went from packed nightclubs to boarded up strip malls in a matter of months. Even in more recent history, the pandemic shutdown of 2020 sent Nevada's unemployment rate skyrocketing to 30%, the highest of any state in modern U.S. history. Casinos went dark, shows were canceled, and the tourism pipeline dried up almost instantly. It took years to recover, and in some rural areas, jobs never came back at all. The state's tax structure doesn't help. Nevada relies heavily on sales tax and gaming tax revenue, which both are extremely volatile. In 2023, 72% of Nevada's general fund revenue came from taxes tied to consumer spending. When the spending slows, so does the government's ability to fund essential services. And because Nevada refuses to levy a state income tax, which I think is a great thing, it has one of the smallest state budgets per capita in the nation. Translation: when trouble hits, there's not much of a piggy bank here. Number 2, Alabama. Alabama is a state that wears its heritage like a badge of honor, from college football glory to civil rights history. It's a place with deep cultural roots and communities that have stuck together through thick and thin. But economically, Alabama is teetering on the edge, and the numbers don't lie. The poverty rate here sits around 16%, with child poverty around 22% in many rural counties. The median household income here is about $58,000. A lot of families are surviving paycheck to paycheck with very little in the way of savings, meaning a job loss or medical emergency can send them into financial freefall. And medical emergencies here are far from rare. Healthcare is one of Alabama's biggest vulnerabilities. The state has the third highest uninsured rate in the nation at 10%, 10.1% to be exact, and more than half of its rural hospitals are operating in the red. Since 2010, 14 rural hospitals have closed completely, leaving some communities without emergency care. Residents in rural areas often have to drive an hour or more to reach a hospital, a dangerous gap when seconds matter. Infrastructure isn't faring much better, with 40% of its rural roads rated as being poor or mediocre condition, with nearly 500 bridges that are structurally deficient. These aren't just inconvenient potholes, they're economic choke points. Poor roads raise transportation costs for businesses and make it harder for rural communities to attract investment. Broadband internet is also far behind the national average, meaning entire swaths of the state are shut out from modern remote work and educational opportunities. The economy itself leans heavily on a handful of sectors: manufacturing, agriculture, and aerospace. While Huntsville and parts of the Gulf Coast have seen growth in tech and defense contracting, much of rural Alabama is dependent on low-wage, labor-intensive industries like poultry processing and retail. These are exactly the kinds of jobs that vanish first in a recession, and they rarely come back quickly. Then there's the state's dependence on federal funding. Alabama is one of the most federally reliant states in the nation, with nearly 42% of its budget coming from Washington, D.C. That means Medicaid, infrastructure projects, and even basic public services are vulnerable to political battles happening 800 miles away. If federal spending slows during a national downturn, Alabama will feel the pain almost instantly. Alabama has a lot of heart, but heart doesn't pay the bills or repair bridges. All right, before we get to number 1, if you would be so kind, at the end of this video, we suggest videos. If you'd watch another one, that would really help out the channel. YouTube's really focused on that right now. All right, on to number 1. And number 1, West Virginia. West Virginia is one of the most beautiful states in the country. Thick forests, rolling mountains, winding rivers. It's the kind of scenery that makes you want to slow down and stay a while. But economically, West Virginia is in bad shape, and it has been for a very long time. Let's start with the workforce. West Virginia has one of the lowest workforce participation rates in the entire nation. Just 44.9% of working age adults are employed or even looking for work. That's not just a bad month statistic. That's a chronic condition that's been going on for years. Fewer than 1 in 4 residents have a bachelor's degree or higher, and high school graduation rates, while improving, are still below the national average. In an economy that rewards education and specialized skills, West Virginia is starting from the back of the pack. The decline is rooted in the coal industry. For over a century, coal was king here. They made a lot of money and they lived good. Mining towns thrived, local economies were strong, and union jobs paid enough to support families. But between 2012 and 2023, coal production in the state dropped by more than 50%. Automation reduced the number of miners needed, environmental regulations tightened, and global markets shifted towards cheaper alternatives. The result? Thousands of jobs disappeared, and nothing of comparable scale replaced them. Towns like Welch and Logan went from bustling to boarded up in a generation. Healthcare is another crisis point in West Virginia. They have one of the highest drug overdose death rates in the U.S., 90.9 deaths for every 100,000 people in 2021 alone. The opioid epidemic has devastated communities, leaving families broken and the workforce weakened. A lot of people are either dead or in jail, and their kids are now living with their parents. That's a very common thing in West Virginia right now. Hospitals, especially in rural counties, are struggling to stay open. Several have already closed in the last decade, forcing residents to travel hours for basic care. On top of that, the state ranks near the bottom in nearly every healthcare indicator, from tooth decay to diabetes. The population decline is just as alarming. West Virginia has been losing people for 11 straight years, with a net loss of about 3% of its population since 2010. Young people leave for better job opportunities and rarely come back. That shrinking tax base means fewer resources for schools, roads, and public safety. There's not a lot of money to put in the community in West Virginia. I mean, even the state and the local communities are barely getting by. It's not just the people. Nearly 31% of West Virginia's budget comes from federal aid. That's the fifth highest percentage in the country. Without that money, basic services like Medicaid, education funding, and infrastructure projects are gutted overnight. If there's a federal budget cut or a deep recession, West Virginia wouldn't just feel the pinch, it would be in a full economic collapse. Truth is, West Virginia is already in a slow motion free fall. The only reason it's not on the nightly news is because the decline has been steady, not sudden, and it's been going on for decades. I'm sure they've reported on it back when it started, but doesn't get much press these days. But it's turning into a frickin' ghost town. All right, that's today's video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you got some information out of it. Now go out, have a great day, be nice to each other.